Let me start this a little differently. I came across a paper recently that I couldn't stop thinking about. At first glance, it looked like another academic write-up on information warfare, the kind that usually stays buried in policy circles. But the deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't abstract theory. It was describing something that's already shaping how people think, argue, and even see their own country every day. This is about cognitive warfare. Not in a sci-fi sense, and not as some distant future threat. It's happening right now, largely through the same apps we scroll through when we're bored, angry, or just killing time. Once you understand what's going on, it becomes very hard to unsee. What follows isn't a rant, and it's not a conspiracy pitch. It's a guided walk through what the research actually says, why it matters, and why people outside of government and academia should care. Think of it as one person saying, "Hey, I found something important, and you should probably know about this too." Cognitive warfare and the battle for the American mind. Cognitive warfare has become one of the defining features of 21st century geopolitical competition. Unlike traditional warfare, which targets territory, infrastructure, or military forces, cognitive warfare targets perception, judgment, identity, and belief. Its objective isn't merely to persuade, but to condition populations and decision-makers so that strategic outcomes become predictable and resistance erodes before open conflict ever begins. This report integrates contemporary academic research, policy analysis, and empirical observations. Explain how the People's Republic of China has operationalized cognitive warfare, particularly through social media platforms such as TikTok. The goal is to present an accessible but accurate account of the threat, why current U.S. responses fall short, and what a balanced, analytical, and policy-oriented response could look like. What cognitive warfare actually means. Cognition refers to the full range of mental processes involved in perceiving, reasoning, remembering, judging, and imagining. Cognitive warfare seeks to influence or disrupt those processes at the individual, group, and societal level. NATO defines cognitive warfare as coordinated actions designed to affect attitudes and behaviors by shaping how people think and interpret reality. This isn't propaganda in the old Cold War sense. Propaganda tries to convince you of something specific. Cognitive warfare tries to shape the mental environment you operate in. It changes what feels normal, what feels extreme, and what feels believable. The PRC refers to this approach as cognitive dominion operations. The term matters because dominion implies control of the domain itself, not just influence within it. The objective is mind superiority, meaning a durable psychological advantage that shapes how an adversary perceives its own interests, legitimacy, and future. The strategic framework used by the PRC. China's cognitive warfare doctrine is an evolution of its long-standing three warfares concept: psychological warfare, public opinion warfare, and legal warfare. Cognitive dominion operations integrate all three while adding advanced data collection, artificial intelligence, and emerging neurotechnologies. What stands out in the research is coherence. Cognitive operations aren't treated as side projects. They're a whole-of-society effort involving state media, technology firms, diplomats, cultural institutions, academics, and commercial actors. Everything reinforces a shared strategic narrative. That narrative has three parts of time and one part for it. First, China presents itself as a rising power whose dominance is historically inevitable. Second, it portrays the United States as a corrupt, declining society that's lost moral and political legitimacy. Third, it argues that the existing international order would function better under Chinese leadership. Every smaller message feeds one of those larger claims. Why social media is central. Social media platforms offer direct access to population-scale cognition. They deliver information constantly, personalize it algorithmically, reward emotional engagement, and collect enormous amounts of behavioral data. From a cognitive warfare perspective, they're ideal tools. TikTok is especially important because of its scale, demographic reach, and legal ties to Chinese jurisdiction. Research shows its recommendation systems amplify emotional, polarizing content while suppressing moderate or institutionally supportive material. That dynamic isn't neutral. Over time, it shapes how reality feels. Foreign policy effects. One clear impact shows up in how younger Americans view foreign policy. Research on TikTok engagement during recent conflicts shows disproportionate amplification of content portraying the United States and its allies as morally illegitimate. This doesn't require explicit coordination. Algorithmic incentives alone can drive it. Over time, legitimacy erodes not because people are persuaded in a debate, but because certain narratives become dominant by default. Internal polarization and institutional erosion. Cognitive warfare works best when it exploits existing fractures. Studies document heavy amplification of both far-left and far-right content, alongside suppression of respectful or mainstream discourse. The objective isn't to win an argument, it's to make collective agreement feel impossible. As trust in elections, media, and institutions weakens, national cohesion declines. From a strategic perspective, that directly affects a country's ability to respond during crises. Public health and crisis exploitation. The COVID-19 pandemic showed how cognitive operations can weaponize uncertainty. Misinformation spread widely, undermining trust in medical guidance and government response. That damage didn't end with the pandemic. It conditioned large segments of the population to distrust authority during emergencies, which has implications far beyond public health. Cultural and psychological degradation. Long-term cognitive warfare targets identity and self-perception. Research links heavy social media exposure to negative body image, anxiety, and declining self-worth, especially among adolescents. From a strategic standpoint, this matters. A society struggling with mental health and cultural cohesion is less resilient and easier to demoralize. Data collection as a strategic asset. Social media platforms generate detailed psychological and behavioral data. This includes emotional triggers, social networks, habits, and inferred beliefs. The PRC treats this data as a strategic resource. Advanced analytics allow increasingly precise targeting, shifting influence operations from broad messaging to individualized manipulation. Emerging psychological and neurotechnological risks. Some of the research explores more advanced and controversial areas, including brain-computer interfaces and neurotechnologies informed by behavioral data. While not all claims are fully realized, the trajectory raises serious ethical and security concerns. Targeted psychological interference against high-value decision-makers is no longer science fiction. It's a foreseeable risk. Lawfare and undue influence. Legal systems themselves have become tools. Lawfare uses legal arguments to delay or prevent defensive actions by framing them as violations of free speech or market principles. Undue influence operates alongside this, using financial leverage, political donations, and cultural incentives to align influential individuals and institutions with foreign strategic interests. Why the U.S. response falls short. The United States lacks a unified definition of cognitive warfare and a coherent national strategy. Information operations remain siloed, tactical, and reactive. Without a shared framework, responses stay fragmented. Toward a balanced response. An effective response doesn't require censorship or authoritarian control. It requires clarity, coordination, and resilience. That means defining cognitive warfare clearly, coordinating across agencies, educating the public, strengthening media literacy, and reinforcing institutional trust. Democratic principles aren't weaknesses here. They're strategic assets. Closing thoughts. If you've made it this far, here's the part I keep coming back to. None of this requires you to believe someone is secretly controlling your mind. Cognitive warfare works precisely because it feels normal. It shows up as trends, vibes, outrage cycles, and endless scrolling. The danger isn't that people are dumb. It's that no one ever told them this was a battlefield. Once you know that, the conversation changes. You start asking better questions. You notice patterns. You become harder to manipulate. That's really the point of sharing this. Not to panic and not to point fingers, but to say, this is happening, it matters, and understanding it is the first real form of defense.